expansion was discussed both at a committee level and at the board, and ultimately the league office was tasked by our board with doing an in-depth analysis.
When the biggest star in modern sports history landed in a league that was never engineered to handle her velocity, every load-bearing wall in the building began to crack. For over 27 years, the WNBA operated as a tightly controlled, modestly budgeted endeavor, where growth was calculated in small percentages. Corporate sponsors were carefully courted, and national television slots were treated like rare commodities. But almost overnight, the arrival of Caitlin Clark obliterated every single metric, playbook, and financial forecast on the executive floor. Ratings didn't just tick upward, they surged into stratosphere territory, regularly pulling in over 2 million viewers per broadcast and outperforming long-established men's sports properties. Arenas that had spent years operating with upper bowl curtains pulled shut were suddenly selling out within minutes of single-game tickets going on sale, with secondary market prices soaring higher than NBA playoff seats. Yet behind the velvet ropes and bright lights of this unprecedented surge, there was no victory lap being taken inside executive offices. Instead, a quiet, high-stakes battle erupted for control over the future of the league, pitting traditional women's basketball executives against corporate heavyweights from the NBA, and a locker room full of players demanding their fair share of the new reality. The sheer magnitude of this financial disruption hit the league like an economic freight train, exposing glaring structural deficiencies that had been swept under the rug for decades. When Clark's collegiate fanbase migrated directly into the professional ecosystem, the infrastructure simply buckled under the weight of the demand. Teams were trapped in lease agreements with small, suburban facilities that held under 10,000 spectators, forcing emergency venue shifts to major NBA arenas just to keep up with ticket queues stretching down city blocks. Merchandising pipelines broke down within days of the draft, as jerseys, hoodies, and signature apparel sold out nationwide, leaving millions of dollars on the table because manufacturing contracts hadn't anticipated a cultural phenomenon. Security teams at municipal facilities found themselves overwhelmed by swarming crowds at team hotels and bus loading zones, proving that the old operational model was completely incapable of handling modern mega-stardom. This rapid expansion transformed every routine league decision into a high-pressure crisis, exposing a deep ideological divide between leaders who wanted to proceed with traditional caution and visionaries who realized the time for conservative incrementalism was over. That structural panic placed WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert in an increasingly precarious position as every public statement, media appearance, and corporate maneuver came under intense scrutiny from both veteran athletes and new spectators. The fragile relationship between the executive suite and the locker room finally exploded during a live national television interview where Engelbert was asked to address the escalating physical play on the court and the toxic online discourse surrounding player rivalries. Instead of delivering a nuanced response that validated the athlete's physical sacrifices while positioning the competitive fire as elite sports entertainment, her comments were interpreted by senior players as dismissive, corporate double-talk that prioritized brand image over athlete protection. Within hours, top superstars, union reps, and veteran champions publicly broke rank, issuing scathing responses that exposed a deep, bitter rift at the highest levels of the sport. The illusion of executive harmony was shattered, raising serious questions about whether existing leadership possessed the vision required to pilot a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. While public controversy played out across sports television networks, a far more consequential shift in power was quietly taking place behind closed doors at NBA headquarters in New York. The NBA, which holds a majority 60% ownership stake in the WNBA, had spent decades absorbing financial losses to keep the Women's League operating as a development property. But NBA Commissioner Adam Silver recognized that the landscape had fundamentally shifted from a costly investment into a hyper-lucrative global media engine. Realizing that mishandled leadership could jeopardize billions of dollars in enterprise value, Silver and the NBA Board of Governors decided to step in directly. The NBA took control of the overarching business strategy, deploying its elite corporate dealmakers to lead negotiations for the landmark 11-year, $2.2 billion media rights package with Disney, NBC Universal, and Amazon Prime Video. This massive deal guaranteed financial permanence for the sport, but it also sent an unmistakable message through executive channels. The NBA was no longer sitting back as a passive investor, and major corporate decisions would now be dictated by Adam Silver's boardroom. The immediate impact of this corporate intervention hit the coaching ranks with seismic force, sparking a chaotic off-season reshuffle that completely redrew the competitive map. The epicenter of this earthquake was Indiana, where the Fever front office made the ruthless decision to part ways with head coach Christy Sides, despite reaching the postseason for the first time in nearly a decade. Indiana's ownership group realized that managing a generational talent like Caitlin Clark required an elite tactical mind, capable of designing a world-class, high-speed offensive system. Enter Stephanie White, who had just led the Connecticut Sun to back-to-back deep playoff runs and earned League Coach of the Year honors. White's decision to leave Connecticut and agree to a blockbuster deal with Indiana sent shockwaves through the coaching fraternity. Her arrival instantly transformed the Fever from a young, rising team into a formidable championship contender, creating an immediate domino effect that forced opposing front offices into full-scale panic. Stephanie White's move to Indiana triggered an unprecedented coaching carousel that left rival franchises scrambling to reconstruct their entire operations. The Connecticut Sun, suddenly left without a head coach and facing imminent roster uncertainty, were forced into an emergency organizational rebuild. Out in Chicago, the Sky stunned the basketball world by firing Hall of Famer Teresa Weatherspoon after just one season, desperately seeking a coaching identity that could rival the tactical firepower being assembled in Indianapolis. Meanwhile, legacy franchises like the Los Angeles Sparks and Dallas Wings began liquidating contracts and restructuring their front offices to prepare for a new era dominated by pace, space, and perimeter dominance. The hiring of White proved that the competitive standard of the league had been raised overnight. Front offices could no longer afford long rebuilds or experimental coaching setups when the business of winning had become an absolute financial mandate. Yet, as executives maneuvered behind glass windows and coaches overhauled playbooks, the physical action on the floor reached a fever pitch that threatened to spiral out of control. From the moment Caitlin Clark stepped onto a professional court, she was met with a brutal, hyper-physical style of defense that became the central talking point of the season. Hard perimeter fouls, full-court pressuring, and aggressive physical contact became standard operating procedure for opposing veterans determined to assert their dominance over the hyped rookie. But as game after game featured viral highlights of hard floor impacts and heated bench shouting matches, the national media discourse exploded into an all-out culture war. Commentators debated whether the physical play was simply standard professional defense or a deliberate effort by bitter veterans to target the player driving the league's economic boom. Officiating crews were caught right in the middle of this firestorm, consistently criticized by both sides for either failing to control dangerous fouls or blowing the whistle so frequently that it ruined the fast-paced flow of the game. This escalating on-court tension exposed a massive vulnerability in player welfare protocols, bringing the long-simmering dispute over team travel to a dramatic boiling point. For years, players had been forced to fly on standard commercial airlines, enduring cramped middle seats, long layovers, lost equipment bags, and brutal early morning connections that severely degraded elite physical recovery. But as Clark's fame reached unprecedented heights, commercial airport terminals transformed into chaotic flashpoints. Fans, autograph seekers, and content creators routinely mobbed team gates, creating severe security risks for players navigating public concourses. Following a series of high-profile airport incidents that put player safety in direct jeopardy, the union demanded immediate, non-negotiable changes. Cathy Engelbert and the league office were forced to cave to immense public pressure, announcing a full-time, league-wide charter flight program, costing an estimated $25 million annually. While the move was hailed as a monumental victory for player health, the sudden financial burden sparked furious debate among franchise owners, pitting wealthy, deep-pocketed investors against smaller market owners struggling to absorb the new baseline overhead. That internal ownership dispute was merely the opening salvo in a much larger, high-stakes battle over the redistribution of wealth in modern professional sports. Recognizing that their collective leverage was at an all-time high amidst record-breaking television ratings and surging corporate sponsorships, the WNBA Players Association executed a bold strategic move. Led by union leaders like Nneka Ogwumike and Terry Jackson, the players officially voted to exercise their opt-out clause in the collective bargaining agreement, signaling the end of the current economic contract. The union made their demands unequivocally clear. They were no longer willing to accept a compensation model where players received less than 10% of total league revenue, while their counterparts in the NBA operated on a near 50-50 revenue split. The players demanded massive baseline salary increases, fully funded career transition programs, comprehensive family planning benefits, and true equity stakes in the league's booming enterprise value. The player union's aggressive posture sent shockwaves through ownership circles, creating a deeply divided executive front as the clock started ticking toward a potential labor stoppage. On one side stood the traditionalist owners, who argued that while revenue numbers were undeniably high, operational expenses like charter travel, venue upgrades, and expanded front office staff were eating up margins, making rapid wage expansion financially dangerous. On the other side stood a new wave of aggressive, billionaire tech and media investors who had purchased expansion teams in markets like Golden State, Portland, and Toronto for record-setting franchise fees exceeding $50 million. These modern owners, backed by Adam Silver's corporate growth strategy, viewed high player salaries not as a burdensome expense, but as a necessary investment to build a world-class entertainment product. They argued that withholding real revenue sharing from the very athletes driving the television ratings was an outdated, short-sighted strategy that risked destroying the sport's golden moment. While executive boardrooms turned into strategic war rooms, Stephanie White was hard at work behind closed doors in Indiana, completely dismantling and rebuilding the Fever's tactical DNA. White recognized that playing alongside Caitlin Clark required an entirely different athletic profile and mental processing speed than traditional basketball systems demanded. She began crafting a revolutionary offensive architecture built on lightning-fast transition reads, deep three-point spacing, and continuous off-ball cutting, designed to catch defensive rotations in constant recovery mode. To maximize Clark's historic court vision, White prioritized surrounding her with elite two-way wings and mobile bigs like Aaliyah Boston, who could execute high-speed pick-and-roll reads in the short roll. But implementing a system of this complexity required more than just coaching diagrams. It required high-level talent acquisition, putting intense pressure on Indiana's general manager to dominate the upcoming free agency period. The prospect of playing in Stephanie White's dynamic system alongside Caitlin Clark fundamentally altered the free agency matrix across the entire league. Historically, top-tier free agents gravitated exclusively toward legacy powerhouses in big-market glamour cities like New York and Las Vegas, where championship rings and off-court lifestyle perks were guaranteed. But the economic reality of the modern WNBA flipped that script on its head. Playing in Indianapolis suddenly meant guaranteed national television exposure, massive social media amplification, and lucrative shoe and endorsement deals driven by millions of eyeballs, watching every single possession. Whispers began circulating through locker rooms that multiple all-star veterans were actively looking for ways to maneuver their way onto the Fever roster, causing immense panic among opposing front offices desperate to keep their championship cores intact. General managers in rival cities were forced into desperate counter-moves, offering max salary extensions and promises of roster overhauls just to prevent a talent drain toward the Midwest. As the league's competitive balance tilted, Adam Silver continued to exert firm, backstage authority over the overarching direction of the enterprise. Silver understood that the friction between rising player power, traditional management, and explosive media growth was a critical juncture that would define the next 20 years of professional basketball. To ensure operational excellence, the NBA began seamlessly integrating its global marketing, data analytics, and broadcast production teams directly into WNBA operations. NBA executives quietly took the lead in structuring expansion draft rules, setting international marketing strategies, and preparing for future digital streaming integration. This massive corporate overhaul effectively modernized franchise operations from top to bottom, forcing legacy owners to adopt NBA-level business practices or risk being forced out by wealthier investment groups eager to buy up franchises at skyrocketing valuations. Meanwhile, the raw intensity on the floor showed no signs of cooling down as the competitive friction between teams reached unprecedented levels. Rivalries that had once been quiet regional disputes transformed into bitter, hyper-analyzed national showdowns packed with personal animosity and athletic pride. Opposing defenders approached games against Indiana with an almost desperate level of intensity, knowing that stopping Clark on national television was the fastest way to make a career statement and command elite respect from their peers. Hard fouls were met with immediate team-wide confrontations. Technical fouls accumulated at record rates, and post-game press conferences became required viewing as players and coaches traded verbal jabs. This raw, unfiltered competitiveness provided incredible sports entertainment, drawing in casual viewers who realized that women's basketball had evolved into one of the most intense, unforgiving sports products on television. Yet, beneath the electrifying game highlights and booming ticket sales lay a persistent, dangerous threat to the league's golden age. If Adam Silver, Cathy Engelbert, and the Board of Governors failed to strike a fair, equitable deal with the player union during the upcoming CBA negotiations, the entire operation risked grinding to a catastrophic halt. The players made it abundantly clear through their media presence that they were prepared to stand their ground, even if it meant walking away from the court. The narrative that female athletes should simply be grateful for exposure was completely dead. The modern WNBA player viewed herself as an elite media driver, deserving of corporate compensation parity. A labor strike or lockout, at the precise moment millions of new fans were tuning in, could inflict permanent damage on the brand, alienating corporate sponsors, and ruining the greatest economic boom in the history of women's sports. The pressure on league executives was further compounded by the chaotic, high-stakes battle over rapid franchise expansion. With major investment groups in cities like San Francisco, Toronto, Portland, and Denver handing over hundreds of millions of dollars in expansion fees, existing owners began arguing furiously over how that capital should be allocated. Legacy owners wanted the expansion cash distributed immediately to offset rising operational costs and pay down historical debts, while forward-thinking executives demanded that every dollar be reinvested into central media production, youth development pipelines, and global marketing strategies. The struggle over expansion cash exposed a fundamental clash of philosophies. Was the league a defensive, cost-conscious business, trying to maintain modest profitability, or a aggressive global sports brand ready to spend whatever it takes to dominate the international sports market. Through every board